I'm Aryeh Schwartz, and welcome to the Winsidr show where it's all about the W. Today we're talking Seattle Storm versus the LA Sparks in another do or die round 2 of the WNBA Playoffs. If you like our show, please consider joining our Patreon community. For less than a cup of coffee a month, you can directly show support for the hard work we do covering the W. I'm here with Brady Klopfer, and we're talking Storm versus the LA Sparks. Brady, how's it going? You excited for playoff basketball in LA?
I am extremely excited. It's going to be a fun game. My only complaint is that they decided to put the two games on Sunday so close to each other. So since I'll be covering the game, I'll probably miss like the first half, maybe the first three quarters of the Vegas Chicago game, which is a bummer. So I kind of wish they'd given us a little bit more space there, but both games should be fantastic, and I'm very much looking forward to some playoff basketball in LA. It's a good
It's
vibe.
exciting, man.
Yeah, and playoff basketball in LA is a fun things. They only had one home game last year, but the fans really showed up for it. A lot of energy, a lot of excitement. The players are obviously always very into it, so it's a completely different vibe.
All right, well, let's talk about something. I mean, last time these two teams meet, it was ridiculous. I mean, 102-68, I believe, was the final. Candace Parker dropped 20. Was it the season finale? I'm blanking.
It was the second to last game for the Sparks, at least.
Yeah, okay. So second to last game, and I mean, just ridiculous. They had something like 47 or something like that points in the paint. They just dominated Seattle in the paint, a franchise record. When I look at this matchup, the thing that always kind of comes to my mind is when I think of the LA Sparks, I think of a team that has almost dipped their toes in both pools in the sense of they are a little bit undersized in the true basketball, positionings, if you want to call it that, in regard to like the bigs. They're overskilled, and I mean that in they make up for the lack of size with being overskilled, smart, great footwork, all that jazz. And then they also dip their toes in the fastball, get in transition, flex. They have one of the greatest flexes of all time in Candace Parker. She can play literally any position. We'll say it over and over. But when you face up against Seattle, that's what really makes this an interesting matchup to me, because Seattle kind of always had that issue of not being able to necessarily go up against the true bigs. They would just try and force their own game upon them and kind of run the ball. And that's what I think makes this matchup so interesting, is because LA is able to dip their toes in both, they're able to play Seattle at their game, but also force the ball inside and take advantage of those opportunities that they're getting. I mean, Russell for Seattle has definitely caused a little bit of a change in that modem, as you were. But talk to me about your thoughts as far as the paint and the styles of play of these two Titans clashing.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and it proves that the Sparks can kind of take this game wherever they want, which is crucial for them. Because one of the things that stood out to me about that last game that was just such a dominating performance by the Sparks is, so they played 3 times this year, right? The first game was in Seattle. The Storm beat the Sparks by 22 points. This was back in June when the Sparks didn't look very good and were pretty injured. But in that game, Jewell Loyd had 23 points. Jordan Canada was injured. She didn't even play, and they still won by 22. But the backcourt was just eating the Sparks alive. With Jewell Loyd just destroyed them. So then they play again in July, and I was very curious to see how they were going to handle that backcourt of Canada and Loyd. And, I asked Eric Fisher about it before the game, what they were going to do about it, and he was kind of talking about how you can't really stop them. You can just kind of slow them, but here's some of the things we're going to do. Then in that second game, which the Sparks won, they completely shut down Jewell Loyd and Jordan Canada, just completely took the backcourt out of the game, won that game by, I think, 8 points. Kind of a close game, but they won because they shut down that backcourt. And then in this last game, the 34-point victory, Jewel and Jordan Canada, they didn't dominate, but they had good games. They shot efficiently. They each got some points. They each got some assists. And it didn't matter because the Sparks, like you said, were just completely shutting them down in the interior. So that's something that really plays in their favor, is that they've really, they beat the Storm twice this year. And the first time they did it by beating them on the perimeter, and the second time they did it by beating them in the interior. And that opens up, a lot of doors for you as a team when you're going into a game knowing we can beat you really in any area of this game. And even in the last game, they beat them in the interior, but they were getting out and running. They were getting out in transition, getting a lot of easy opportunities that they were creating. Had a lot of fast break points that game, if I recall correctly. Certainly had a lot of fast break opportunities. So it's a favorable match for LA right now because this really is a game that they can take to pretty much any spot on the floor and still have the advantage. As good as Natasha Howard has been, as good as Lloyd and Canada have been, the Sparks can claim to have a better perimeter. They can claim to have a better interior. They can claim to have a better half-court game, a better transition game. They can take this game where they want to, and that obviously plays pretty strongly in their favor.
Well, if we're talking about who's going to dictate where this game goes, we got to talk about Candace Parker. Talk to me. I mean, look, the biggest criticism of Candace Parker, I don't think is a fair criticism currently at her age. Not to knock her, is just like, let's be real. Sometimes she disappears for a little bit, or sometimes she takes some time off. Now, do I think that she should be voted most underrated player in the league? Hell no. But that being said, that is the only aspect that I think there's some truth to, of saying, yeah, she'll kind of space out for a little bit during the game. Candace Parker is obviously going to be zoned in the playoffs. We're getting to the end of her career. She wants more rings, and this is where champions get super serious. So she's a key player for me. Talk to me about what you need to see in your eyes from Candace Parker as far as getting the ball going, getting moving early in this game to stay active.
Yeah, well, there are a few different things that the Sparks really need to see from Candace. And first off, just to touch on that point of her, kind of disappearing, spacing out a little bit, that is definitely extremely true. And I also think fans don't realize how much she was dealing with injuries this year. I don't think she let on quite how much she was hampered by not just the injuries, but by the rehab process, which I think when you're a player at her age who's seen as many minutes as she has, I think the rehab process of an injury, even a small one, is more grueling than actually playing the game. So I think, some of that has been excusable for that reason. But like you said, the best players show up when the games really matter. I expect that we'll see that from Candace. But I think the most important thing for her is to really be active offensively. Because one of the things that helped the Sparks in their last game is, in general, this year, the Storm have done a little bit of a cross matchup with the Sparks, where Nneka Ogwumike is the Sparks player who defends Natasha Howard. But on the other end of the court, Natasha Howard is defending Candace Parker, which makes sense because Natasha Howard, arguably the best defensive player in the league, and Candace Parker can do everything. It's a good matchup there. But in the last game, Candace was very active. She was spending a lot of time on the perimeter. She was driving. She was getting out in transition. She was running pick and rolls on both the ball handling and the screen setting side of things. And it was really forcing Natasha to work really hard defensively. And the more you force Natasha Howard to work defensively, the less energy she has offensively, the less energy she has for rebounding. And that's a huge part, in my opinion, of why the Sparks dominated the interior in the last game. Was Candace was playing like a small forward, and Natasha Howard was just getting worked and getting exhausted trying to stay with her for so much of that. So that's the biggest thing for me. The second biggest thing with Candace is just to not stagnate. When she gets the ball in her hands, they need to go to work. This Sparks offense has really been hit or miss this year. There have been times, like in the last game against Seattle, they had 102 points in that game against what we know is a really good Seattle defense. Scoring 102 points against them, that's exceptional. So that's a sign of how good this offense can be when it's flowing. But on the flip side, we've seen the offense struggle so many times, and it usually happens because things stagnate. People stop cutting, people stop driving, and it tends to be you get the ball in Candace or Chelsea Gray's hands, and they just kind of stand there, wait around for something to happen. Candace can dictate that when she gets the ball at the elbow, at the wing, on the block, wherever she needs to go to work, passing, driving, facing up, whatever. Because that's when the offense is working, is when they are being active. And that starts with Candace Parker. When she is active, when she is trying to make things happen, things usually happen with all 5 of the players on the offense. And so that's the biggest thing I'm looking for from her, is just activity, get the offense flowing, make Natasha Howard work.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you're saying. And it's interesting because hearing you talk about that, it's like Howard's a player who not once this whole season have I said she looks tired until that game, and I was like, wow,
Yeah.
and that is impressive. That shows you that vet savviness, that ability to exhaust a player on the other end, even without throwing in the exhaustion that might you automatically think goes with that. Let's flip it on the other side though. I'm picking this for you. My key player for Seattle is Jewell Loyd. We've seen her get shut down a good amount. We saw her also struggle with injuries throughout the season. She really showed up in that game against Minnesota. And to me, I've said this all year long, if this team wants to overcome the many hurdles that have been put in front of them, it's going to be on the back of Jewell Loyd. We know Natasha Howard is a beast and she's going to get hers, but you need that secondary scorer, that third scorer, to really step up. And Jewell Loyd needs to be that secondary scorer if this team wants to make a serious run in the playoffs. Talk to me about the importance of Jewell and what she can do, or what weaknesses she might be looking to take advantage of on the defense of LA.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that she's the most important player for Seattle in this game. She has the ability to make things a little bit of a struggle there for the Sparks, and that's key for two main reasons here. Not only can she put up points and force the Sparks in, having to deal with a great player, but she can dictate the personnel that's on the floor for the Sparks, because if they're having a hard time containing her, then they have to start playing some of their players who are less offensively talented. You're talking about more minutes possibly for Elena Beard, who just hasn't been healthy, hasn't been right this season. Right now, she's a little bit of a liability on offense. It means you have to play Tierra Ruffin-Pratt more minutes, who is good and has earned those minutes, but often brings down the offense of the Sparks a little bit. So she's a very key player from that end, just because, part of the reason why the Sparks dominated in the last game was they didn't have to make any adjustments. They didn't have to change any of their personnel, any of their offensive style, any of their defensive style based on anything Seattle was doing. But Jewell Loyd is the one player that presents that opportunity, where if she is playing, if she is cooking, then you have to adjust. You have to change the things you're doing. You have to change the players that you're putting on the court. You have to change the way you're playing defense. The Sparks do an interesting matchup in most of their games, where they put their point guard Chelsea Gray on the opposing team's small forward. In this case, Alicia Clark, and then they put Tierra Ruffin-Pratt on whoever is the strongest backcourt player. So in this case, Jewell Loyd, and it works pretty well. But they also are a pretty switch-heavy defense. So even if Ruffin-Pratt is locking down Loyd, if Loyd is relentless and persistent and starts working on some of those screens and getting some switches, maybe she gets Quanah Williams switched onto her, maybe she gets Sydney Weiss switched onto her, then you're able to start getting some easier buckets. You force Derek Fisher to consider what personnel he has on the court. And in addition to that, you start wearing down the team by getting into the lane. One area where the Sparks have had a tremendous weakness this year is in free throw discrepancy. They foul a lot. I don't think their foul discrepancy is that much bigger, because they draw a lot of fouls on the perimeter, but they don't draw shooting fouls, and they commit a ton of shooting fouls. So if you
You've been reading those game notes
Yes,
from the
yes.
PR from
The
them.
PR is heavy on addressing this one, and the players are too. You know, they brought it up a lot of times, but for the most part, the Sparks individuals, other than Shanae Ogwumike, have done a good job of staying out of foul trouble. But we have seen games where they get into foul trouble, where Nneka or Candace pick up a few. Where Tierra Ruffin Pratt, I think, in their last game, didn't play that many minutes because she was picking up some fouls. So Jewel Lloyd certainly presents that ability as well, because she can penetrate, she can start to force the help defense to react, which can be a way to get through this LA defense.
Let's talk about offense. Key players in my mind for the Sparks, and I'll let you talk about whoever. Candace Parker or Quanah Williams. It's gonna be them two in my mind. Obviously, everyone knows Candace, so I had to throw in another player who I think could be a spark plug, really put in some big points and take this team to the next level. Is there any other player that you're kind of eyeing besides those two who might be?
Raquana,
Yeah.
Raquana is just, I mean, you said it right. She's a spark plug. She's had a few games this year where she has just exploded, and when she does that, they don't lose. Like, well, I shouldn't say that, because she did have that game versus Vegas where she put up an obscene first half and then they lost. But for the most part, she's kind of been a barometer for them. It happened in their final game of the season versus Minnesota. It was a close game. I think the Sparks were up by 1 or 2 at halftime. And then they came out of the third quarter and Raquana hit three 3-pointers in like a 2-minute span. One of them was a 4-point play. One of them forced Cheryl Reeve to call a timeout just so she could get Odyssey Sims out of the game because she couldn't guard Quanah Williams. And suddenly it went from a 2-point game to a double-digit game, and it was never close after that. And I think that's the role that Raquana can play on this Sparks team as a lethal 3-point shooter and as one of the most explosive athletes in the league. Is she has the ability to be a run in and of herself. She has the ability to have a 2, 3, 5-minute stretch where she just catches fire. And not only is it debilitating, but it can swing you from a 5-point deficit to a 5-point lead, or a tie game to a double-digit lead. And a lot of times that's all you need, especially with this Sparks team, where when they are clicking, they are so good. But when the game is close, sometimes they don't seem to have that confidence or that comfort that they're as good as they actually are. So having a player that can just inject some quick offense, give you that lead that allows you to kind of play a little bit more comfortably and go, hey, we're really good at this. Let's go do it. I think that is huge. But I also think Nneka Ogwumike is a really crucial offensive player here, because she will most likely not be guarded by Natasha Howard. Again, they usually put Howard on Parker. And, Nneka Ogwumike is one of the best players in the league. And she is automatic if she gets the ball in the paint. So if she is able to get offensive rebounds, if she's able to get a little bit of space as the screen setter in the pick and roll, she's going to start getting the ball in those favorable positions that really change things when you play a team like Seattle. And they're going to have to make adjustments if she is playing that well. I mean, in the last game against Seattle, she only had 14 points, but she only played 17 minutes. She just dominated. There was nothing that Mercedes Russell could do. There were so many times where they were having to send, a guard down into the paint just to provide some extra coverage on Ogwumike, because for the most part, if she catches the ball within 8 feet of the hoop, no one can guard her one-on-one, especially when you're not putting Natasha Howard on her. So if she's creating opportunities for herself, I think she can really disrupt Seattle's game plan, because if you put Natasha Howard on someone who's not Nneka Ogwumike and Nneka Ogwumike starts eating, you have to rethink your entire defensive plan. You have to change things, because there's nothing you can do at that point. So if Nneka gets it going, I don't see a way that Seattle can stay with LA.
Yeah, I expect to see a nice wave of different defenders trying to lock her down, because Howard's got to stay on Candace Parker. Let's flip it to the Storm, though. I'm looking at Jewel Lloyd. I already spoke about her being a key player, but Sami Wickham, the Achilles heel for the Sparks defense this whole season has been the three ball. Sami Wickham has one of the most beautiful and deadliest shots in the W. And we're not even talking about the league leading 3-point percentage shooter in Alicia Clark. We're talking Sami Wickham. I think she's going to be kind of similar to Quanah. She can be a spark plug that just drops 12 points real quickly, disappears for another portion of the game, but that 12-point spurt pushes their team over. Is there anybody else offensively that you're looking at from Seattle that might be painful for LA to watch?
Those are definitely the keys for me. You're definitely on the money there, because the Sparks, as much as they like to say that one of their defensive values is to defend the 3-point line, the reality is there have been so many games this year where players just repeatedly get open three after open three after open three. Against LA, Whitcomb burned them earlier in the year. We've seen Leilani Mitchell just have a destructive performance. Like you said, they just have issues defending the three ball, and I think Whitcomb and Clark have that ability to come in spurts, and all of a sudden you're putting up 9 or 12 points in 3 or 4 possessions, and just like that, it switches the game, and you're in a little bit of trouble. So those are kind of the biggest, but I do think Jordan Canada presents an interesting situation for the Sparks, just because she's obviously extremely talented. She can get out in transition, which sometimes the Sparks are slow to get back defensively, and Canada is going to be guarded, at least out of the gate, by Quanah Williams, who I think is an underrated defender, but has a lot of weaknesses on that side of the floor. And Canada certainly has the ability to get the better of that matchup and to kind of dictate the pace of the game. If she's getting out in transition, maybe she's forcing some mismatches there defensively. So I think she plays a big role. But like you said, the 3-point shooting is a really big one because the Sparks struggle there. And I think just the transition game is a big one because the Sparks aren't always comfortable when they kind of have to adjust and have to improvise. And if you're getting out and pushing in transition, even if you're not scoring off of that, you're forcing the defense to match up in ways that they weren't initially planning on matching up. And you get some cross matches that you can potentially take advantage of. And that is one of the keys, I think, to beating LA, because they're a lot more comfortable when they get to set up the way they want to set up. And if you force them to improvise a little bit, you can find some openings.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, let's talk about defense, though. I'm just going to run through my 4 key players on defense. Tell me if you agree, disagree, if I should add anybody to the list, or if I'm completely off. Key defenders for the Storm, for me, I'm saying Mercedes Russell and Jordan Canada. Whether, obviously who they're going to be matched up against is going to be different. But for me, the 2 key elements are disrupting the guard play, because we know ISO Gray can do some dirty work, and then controlling the paint, as we saw them get destroyed last game. And then flip it to the other side, giving a shout out to my girl NECA, who's going to need to be a dominant force again in that paint. And then TRP. I mean, her defensive ability this whole season has been great. She kind of has that Storm element where she'll just, for the first 2 quarters, meet you right off the inbound and just get in your head and pick away at you until you make some mistakes. Am I missing anybody?
No, I think that is right on the money. TRP is a huge one. I mean, if she's going to open up the game on Jewell Loyd. If she shuts down Jewell Loyd the way that we know she has the ability to, it's really difficult for me to envision any path to victory for Seattle.
I'll translate that. They're losing.
Yes, they're losing. There's no way that Seattle can win this game if TRP gets the better of Jewell Loyd. There's just no way, and she can. So that's what makes it such a critical matchup. And also, I think another big thing there with the TRP matchup is when she's at her best, she is able to fight through screens, fight over screens, and allow LA to not have to switch, to not get those bad mismatches. If she is doing that, if she's keeping Loyd from having those possessions where she can get switched onto over Quanah Williams or a Sydney Weiss, then that's just a huge win for LA. And then on the other side, I agree with you with what you said about Seattle, especially when it comes to Mercedes Russell, because again, that matchup against NECA Ogwumike, that's not a matchup that looks good for her on paper. And if it goes the way that we would assume it would go, then it's big trouble for Seattle. They're going to have to change things. They're going to have to put different people on her. They're going to have to send help, which opens up the 3-point shooting for LA. But if Mercedes Russell can hold her own on that end of the court, if she can force Nneka Ogwumike into just an average night instead of a good or a great night, that allows you to play straight up. You live with some of those points. You force LA to get the rest of their points from harder spots on the floor. You allow everyone to play straight up. You keep the open 3-point shooters at bay. And that's what gives you a chance to have a strong defensive outing, in my opinion.
All right. I got two requests for you. Request number one, well, I know you're going to be at the game. I want you to go up to Gary Klopp, and I want you to have a battle of the Klopps and decide once and for all who's the true Klopp.
Well, as long as it doesn't involve, a test of basketball knowledge, because I think he would assert his Klopp dominance in that department.
I'm going to find a way to have you guys compete in something for the title of the true Klopp. But on a more serious note, I'll be kind and I'll give my score prediction first, and then I'll let you go. I want numbers. All right. Some of our guests who have come on to talk about these playoff previews have shied away from the numbers. I think you got to go numbers. It's too easy to pick one team. I'm going 94-85. So a nice 9-point win for the LA Sparks moving on to the semifinals.
I like that.
What's yours?
I'm gonna go a little bigger. I'm gonna go 84-70.
Ooh. Who do you think's winning?
I think LA. Okay. LA, definitely. I think Seattle has a little bit of a better defensive performance than they did the other day. I think they slow things down a little bit. I don't think LA is going to have quite the offensive outburst that they had, but I think this is a game that they're going to control. LA hasn't had very good first quarters most of the year, but I think they're going to really take control in the second quarter and in the third quarter. I think it's going to be a pretty comfortable win. Maybe Seattle closes the gap a little bit in the final minutes, but I think this is going to be a game that for the most part is over by the fourth quarter. I think it'll be a double-digit win. I think it'll be a strong performance on both sides of the court for LA, and a decent performance by Seattle, who just, let's face it, does not have as much talent with the injuries that they have. They're not as talented as LA. There's no shame in losing a road playoff game to a team with better personnel. So I think both teams are going to play decently, but LA is going to come out 84-70.
As we say, we believe the players of the W and its community deserve the same in-depth analysis and respect that men's sports receive on a daily basis. Please consider joining our Patreon community to help support us in the hard work we do covering the W. Thanks, Brady, and hopefully we'll have you on, or, whatever, but hopefully we'll have you on either way come next round of the playoffs.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, man.
As always.